Okay, hi, hello, everybody. Welcome to today's lesson. Thank you so much for being patient with me while I take a little bit of extra time to create this week's content and materials. As most of you have heard by now, I've just been kind of out of it with like having a fever and whatever cold I have going on. So as one does whilst living as a human, just doing the best I can over here. So for today's lesson, let's jump into the theme of academic research. And we are really embracing this new terminology that we're learning, the word discourse. So previously we have talked about learning as a conversation. Discourse is just the academic way of referring to that learning conversation. During this lesson, we are going to look at the purpose of academic research, some strategies to refine the topic, understand the discourse, some strategies for entering into the research process. So understanding that research is a cyclical process. It's not a neat stepping stone path from A to B. It's something that we consistently go back and forth between different questions. There's also a reminder of the handout for guiding questions to motivate research and evaluate sources. So if you're part of my hybrid or in-person classes, then you got this handout during class. If you are one of my asynchronous students, then you have a link to this document in the resources and reminders in the lesson. So please do take a look at that handout and use it to your advantage during research. Then we'll look at strategies for seeking out and accessing sources and documenting that research. So as we're about to jump in, as always, please take notes. Jotting down a few ideas from each slide, as well as any ideas that come up that will help you during your own research process. So as we're talking about the discourse community, and as we're talking about the variety of sources, pause the video if needed, but make space in your notes to brainstorm and think about communities, perspectives, and sources that you want to engage with to really make this learning experience personalized to you. All right, let's dive in. So firstly, the purpose of academic research. Academic research is about gathering up multiple perspectives. Thinking critically requires us to contend with multiple diverse viewpoints, not simply a list of information that supports our argument and a little bit of attention to a counterpoint. Critical thinking really requires us to understand the conversation in an organic way rather than in a deductive way of like we're seeking to confirm the bias that we already have. To be successful as an academic writer, you need to be familiar with the major concepts, questions, problems, goals, and consequences related to your topic or related to your field of study. So I know a lot of us are choosing topics that are connected to our major, our career pathway, or something that we're personally invested in our real lives. So to engage effectively in those conversations, you need to be familiar with the discourse, the discussion that's taking place. It's not just a scavenger hunt of finding information and reporting it back. In other words, research encourages deeper learning and sustained engagement through exploring, evaluating, and connecting with the ongoing conversation or discourse in order to arrive at a relevant, contextual, and meaningful view toward your topic, which is the whole, end goal for this course is to create an argument that brings all of those pieces together. So now that we kind of know the purpose, we have that fresh in our minds, let's take a look at refining our topic. There's a little bit of strategy to refocus and reframe the topic so that we can research it more effectively. When we revise our topic, it just means that we think about it in a different way. And often it's to sort of narrow down the scope. Otherwise, our field of research will become really overwhelming. As we've discussed in the past, it's not really possible for us to cover the entire topic. So if we sort of narrow down to our key interests, it will give us a little bit more focus and more direction. The way I recommend to do this is to begin with a comprehensive overview. So our first research journal for this project is an AI overview, and these are very helpful because it gets us kind of a glimpse at the total discussion, and then from there we can narrow it down to the key concepts, arguments, or contexts that we really care about. So it can give us a chance to say, okay, I realize that this conversation is pretty large, but for me personally, I just want to take a look at this little table group right here, this little side conversation that's happening. This is where I want to spend my time. Once we find out the niche or the focus that we want to really engage with, we can begin to look for specific viewpoints, voices, perspectives, angles, unsolved problems, and ongoing debates. So when we revise and refine our research topic, it can help to develop anchor questions. So questions that really you can come back to time and time again. Focus topics, so keywords and key ideas, because those two things give you a manageable scope without feeling overwhelmed. It can also help to refocus the discussion so that it includes your perspective, your interest, and your concern. So when you narrow down the key concepts and when you choose who do you want to speak with when you speak about this topic, it's because that somehow has room for your own voice. And this is important because as a beginning researcher, as a student who is learning to engage with the discourse, you are actually able to bring a unique contribution into the discussion. You are able to bring a fresh mindset, some fresh questions, some fresh goals into the discussion. So really centering on your perspective and your concerns when you select that refined, narrowed down scope for your topic. So if you feel inspired by any of these ideas at the moment, you might pause and write down in general what your topic is, and write down specifically some questions that you are interested in exploring, some questions that open up a space to connect from your own point of view. I'm going to move forward with the slide presentation, but we'll pause frequently to add our own thoughts into the notes. So once we kind of understand the purpose of academic research, we've refined and narrowed down our own kind of niche, we really want to attack the situation, and we want to go out there and understand the discourse. So research is often framed in terms of an academic conversation, characterized as an ongoing discussion that takes place across long periods of time that includes some fundamental, like historical assumptions, questions, and problems, as well as recent debates, recent consequences, or repercussions. This conversation also takes place among many diverse perspectives and participants. These are regular everyday people, local community groups, commercial, political, or government bodies, scholarly or academic or scientific studies, etc. These are just to name a few. And the academic conversation takes place across a variety of media and genres that includes writing, speech, audiovisual, imagery, behavior, etc. So as we're thinking about how to understand the discourse in our own notes, we might want to take a few minutes to jot down what comes to mind as some fundamental, like historical assumptions, questions, problems, beliefs, values, as well as some recent debates, recent consequences, recent problems. We might want to take a few minutes to think about who is going to participate in our conversation. We might click over to our project number 1 final draft to look at what we wrote down there and see if we might add something, narrow it down a little bit, get more specific. Thinking also about where we might look in terms of media and genre. We should have read the project number 1 overview by now, and if you were somebody who decided to save a copy of that or print it out, there's a lot of suggestions for what kind of media to look at. Maybe some of those are inspiring to you. I'm going to move forward with the presentation, so pause if you're still writing notes and getting inspired. But when you're ready, we'll take a look at some specific kinds of discourse community. So this, just like we're learning the new word discourse community is kind of a new word, but it just refers to people, groups, and organizations that share an interest or investment in your topic, share some common assumptions, common questions, common worries or concerns, values or goals, a community of people who communicate across media or platforms together. So thinking about your discourse community and remembering not to oversimplify. As critical thinkers, we don't just want to look at what's in common. We also want to investigate disagreements, dissenting views, opposing arguments, and the harder to pinpoint gray area of complex issues. A lot of issues are not just black and white, but there are a lot of voices in the gray area. So if things are coming to mind for your own research topic, as we're beginning to plan, where am I going to look for sources? You can fill in some of these common worries, concerns, values, assumptions, goals, questions. Not only the common ones, but the areas of disagreement as well. So using your notes for your own personal thoughts. Not just copying from the slide. I'm going to move on and we'll take a look a little more specific types of discourse communities. So we talked about, the type of community. So a scholarly or academic discourse community generally intends to create new knowledge, evaluate existing knowledge, spread ideas. And these are scientific, academic, research studies, like medical often, anthologies, webinars, TED Talks. We also might look at professional or practitioner communities, and these are usually communities who provide services. It could be medical services, legal services, investigative things. We often see this in the form of magazines, journals, conferences, LinkedIn groups, or LinkedIn sponsored materials. Another type of discourse community, commercial media and journalism media. Often they are seeking to generate revenue, spread information. Sometimes these can be nonprofit. We see this in entertainment media, in the news, NPR, like National Public Radio, magazines, documentaries, interviews, websites, advertisements. So if any of these things where you might look to see perspectives about your topic. We also think of interest groups or affinity groups, and these are just groups of people who come together based on shared interest. Facebook groups, Reddit, Discord chats, blogs. You might be looking at, I know oftentimes students find, good information in Reddit, like to bring into their sources. I've had students use Facebook groups to share like surveys or questionnaires and try and get feedback from others, like a SurveyMonkey or a Google Forms. And we also have local or regional discourse communities, and this connects people based on proximity. Again, we can have Facebook groups, DVC or campus communities, local clubs and organizations, conventions, meetups. The common sources that you see in this chart there's a lot of back and forth. Like looking at something in the shape of a chart makes it seem like strict boundaries are here, but really we can see, a scholarly or academic source appear on like Instagram or Facebook. We can see commercial or journalistic types of discourse communities publishing in conferences, magazines, etc. These aren't really strict boundaries. These are just one way to present information on a slide. So thinking about your discourse community, common values, common interests, disagreements and differences, and where you might look to find various voices, different media, different genres. I'm going to move forward. We're going to next look at entering into the research process. So once we have a little bit of goal in mind, like what's my focused topic? What are my anchor questions? What kinds of discourse communities am I really going to engage with? We have some strategies for actually gathering up that information. So before we can enter the discourse, we have to locate it. So this is what we've been doing a little bit in the notes that we've just taken. Where is this discussion taking place? What kinds of industries? What kinds of disciplines? What kinds of institutions, organizations, groups? And we should notice that there are overlapping areas. A single topic, for example, like AI, especially AI in the arts, for example, that's a very popular topic, might find discourse in science communities, art communities, political policies, and popular discourse. So really embracing that overlap. We need to look at when this conversation has been happening. Are we talking about centuries old philosophical ideals, something from recent decades, recent years, or if it's like a tech topic, or sometimes if it's a social movement, by the hour, the discourse changes. And how are these messages reaching us? So think to yourself, I see these messages in different kinds of media, different kinds of sources. Do I notice any type of rhetorical strategies or manipulations that I seem to see every time with this source? Like, is there a lot of fear surrounding this source? Is there a lot of optimism, pessimism, etc.? What attitudes do we see? All right, read back through the notes that you've taken so far and see if you're starting to take shape, an overview of some main issues, some guiding questions, some existing problems, various perspectives or stances, common kinds of examples, common data, commonly cited facts, questions or consequences or context implications. So just based on the thinking that you've done in Project 1, the notes that you've done just brainstorming during these past few slides, try and see if there's some common threads beginning to emerge. And then next we'll jump in. So a reminder to use the handout with some questions to motivate your research. This document changes every semester, but it has all the same basic principles. So questions that determine your research goal, questions that help you discover relevant sources, questions that help you develop your own approach to research, and questions that help you evaluate each and every source that you see, as well as helping you evaluate the collection of sources as a whole. So for this semester, we have a Google Doc to an updated questionnaire. I just didn't know if I could create this slide again because I had to do some photoshopping here. So the picture is here to stay, but the document updates every semester. And the document is also helpful because it has kind of like a vocabulary bank or a reminder of a lot of the course vocabulary that we have looked at throughout the semester. So do avail yourself of that resource. So as we start looking at entering the research process, do keep in mind that it is a back and forth cycle of asking questions, seeking resources, finding and evaluating those resources. And then that in turn might open up new questions or new avenues for seeking different sources, discarding sources that you found irrelevant, readjusting and refocusing your topic. So in general, discovering the sources that sustain the discourse. So that's some academic language right there, but basically, as we are elevating our vocabulary as critical thinkers, just locating the research where the discussion is taking place. Really starting to understand the perspectives, the argument, the evidence, the context. So that 3-part piece, claim, evidence, analysis. Evaluating the source. So does it meet these evaluation criteria? Does it have fallacies? And I like to emphasize for students, if a source is biased or inaccurate or out of date or unreliable, that doesn't mean you need to throw it away. Because what we're going to be doing is engaging with diverse opinions out here. We're going to find some people having bias. As researchers, we just need to balance that out by exploring the alternate bias, by exploring the alternate way of expressing that view. It's we're not just only looking for reliable, unbiased, objective sources. What we are doing is really engaging with the chaos and the mess of real human opinions. And we're also leveraging our critical thinking to read against the grain and to sort of analyze other forms of authority, because we might find that a reputable news source is actually putting out content that has bias or content that's not transparent and things like that. So we shouldn't just be discarding sources just because they don't seem very reputable. Instead, as long as it's relevant and adds something valuable to your discourse or your conversation, then it's a good source to keep on hand. As you interpret, you want to understand the rhetorical strategies, the deeper layers of meaning, analyze the underlying assumptions and consequences, synthesize the connections between sources, and respond from your own point of view. So research-based writing is not a straightforward path from question, answer, explanation, analysis. Instead, it's a continuous loop of overlapping processes that are always being revised, repeated, and researched. So as I mentioned before with the chart of the discourse communities, presenting something on a slide or in a written down chapter often makes it seem easier said than done. But the truth is that the process goes back and forth. So we're always re-evaluating and re-looking and researching throughout the process. So that was a little bit of like the pathway to doing research. Now we're going to look at accessing specific kinds of sources. Goals to keep in mind. We want a body of relevant, credible, and valuable research is crucial to conveying your own sense of authority, especially in Project 3, where you're going to create your own argument towards the topic. At the beginning level of research, it's especially important to research a broad variety of sources. I cannot repeat this enough. I want to see variety of media. So including something out of some of these categories: print media, physical objects, virtual media, written, video, audio, imagery, artifacts, observations that you have, conversations that you have. We also want to see a variety of proximity. So we want to see some primary sources. These would be direct first-hand examples, interviews, observations, photographs, surveys or polls, art, expressive works. We want to see a good amount of secondary sources. These are arguments based on research, based on outside sources. Tertiary sources, we don't want to see very many of these, maybe one or two. The AI overview is going to be a tertiary source, dictionaries, encyclopedias, things like that. We don't want to see too many of those because we really want to privilege people's viewpoints, people's perspectives. We also want to prioritize argumentative sources with viewpoints and opinions, with less attention to expository or informational sources. So goals to keep in mind before we jump in. And now let's jump in. So if we're looking at first-hand data, this could be conducting an interview with somebody invested in your topic or informed about your topic. I recommend that you prepare one or two open-ended questions. When you reach out to them, introduce your topic, the course, your research goals. Try to keep it short so that they can quickly understand why you want to interview them. I recommend keeping it short, like a 10-minute conversation, and please ask permission to record the conversation so that you can take notes and use quotations later on. Another kind of first-hand data is a survey or a poll. And again, my recommendation for this is to prepare 3 to 5 meaningful multiple choice questions and distribute the poll widely. So using social media or asking your instructors if you can distribute the poll to class, putting QR codes places, whatever you want to do. Aim to gather at least 100 results and then quantify that data into a chart so that we can visually see the results. That's why I recommend only 3 to 5 questions and why I recommend for them to be multiple choice. It just helps with data analysis. And then field observations, taking note of what you might want to observe your topic taking place in a relevant setting or at an event. I would say try to do a couple of observations so that you don't overgeneralize from one moment and sort of try and draw conclusions about that. And then I do recommend taking photographs or videos, etc. And of course, being respectful of people's privacy and identity and things like that. So this depends on your topic. So take a few moments as you're taking your own notes. What kind of first-hand data might you feel like gathering? Who might you want to interview? What kind of survey questions might you create? Does your topic take place within a specific area or context that you can make observations about? All right, pause the video if you're brainstorming and if your ideas are flowing. Otherwise, we'll move on. Next, we're going to look at other types of primary sources. Anything that is a work of artistic expression, most forms of entertainment media, anything that involves observing or experiencing the details of actual events or performances. Other types of primary sources include interviews, photographs. Documentary films are usually primary sources. It can get iffy. Advertisements are primary sources. Memorabilia and artifacts, those are primary sources. Clothing, merchandise, paraphernalia of whatever your topic might be. So if you're researching something in the cosmetics industry, you might actually grab some cosmetic items and analyze the rhetorical strategies that are represented by the packaging, for example. In general, a primary source is something that records an experience or uses the material. If you have somebody who is giving testimony about what they witnessed, what they experienced, so sometimes these are like on social media, we might have somebody telling a story. That's a primary source because they're sharing their firsthand experience. So pause here to think about how you might incorporate primary sources into your work. Everybody should incorporate at least 1 or 2 primary sources. Different topics will be more open to this, but please take the effort today to brainstorm how you will bring primary sources into your work. We're going to move on to look at where you can find primary sources at DVC. This one that's an example here is past. Since I've been under the weather, I haven't been able to research a current example for a primary source at DVC. But we do have access to clubs, affinity groups that you can get in touch with through DVC Sync. You can find organizations if there's anybody that you might want to interview, connect with, attend events, etc. So do explore the DVC Student Hub, where DVC Sync is, and get in contact with our cultural ongoings here on campus if you're looking for primary sources. Next, we'll look at secondary sources that we can often find by searching the open web. The internet is where we often turn, like Google Scholar or just Google search. So this isn't really new ideas for anybody, but some new practices to begin is noting the search terms that you use. So keeping a record in your research journal of the search terms that you use helps shed some insight. And then you can come back to those too as you're discussing like the journey that your research went through. As you begin your web search, I would say look at the first page or 2. Like zoom out, take a step back, and sort of just jot down some key themes or words that you notice just in the headlines or like the first, couple sentences that you see on the search result page. So just jot down kind of like a word cloud of everything you're seeing, and use your critical thinking to see what kinds of concerns, what kinds of rhetorical loaded language they might be using, implied questions or hinted arguments, things like that. And then look at the URL. So often on a web search, you can see, like it will tell you whether it's a PDF, whatever, it's a kind of website. This will help you see who is talking about the topic. So if you look at the names of the websites, are you getting a lot of government feedback? Are you getting a lot of medical, scientific? Is this something that's really connected with like law, things like that? So just taking that step back. Don't dive in just yet. Look at the fine print. Look at the first page or 2. That way, so you looked at what your search terms were. You looked at in general what's coming up when I use those search terms. Now you can kind of clarify a little bit. In order to narrow down your results, if you put quote marks around key terms and phrases, it will search it as a phrase, not just individual words. And then you can use the advanced search options if you're looking for certain dates. So if you're looking for something historical or contemporary, certain source types or file types that you want it to pull up. So we're all pretty familiar with searching on the open just website on our browsers. So I will continue on to look at something that's new for all of us, which is the DVC library. So firstly, how to access the DVC library. You can go through the support hub, which is linked inside our class. You can access the DVC support hub from the navigation menu from any Canvas class that you are in or from Insight. Once you are in the support hub, you can find the tile for the library. And as a DVC student, you are more than welcome to work at the Pleasant Hill or San Ramon campus library, whatever is more convenient to you. And you can work one-on-one with real librarians. You can access the library database, and we will learn how to do this later in the module. But this will help connect you to popular sources or academic sources from a variety of media. So it's really handy to meet all the requirements for the project. Within the DVC library, you might go in and look at the physical books themselves. You can browse through books that are related to your topic or related to your subject matter. And just like we talked about when doing web research, any type of research, it's good to zoom out and get an overview before diving into individual sources. So just walking up the aisle, you can see the titles and get a chance to look at some key ideas, like key questions, problems or debates. Often you can get this information by looking at the spine of the book, or you can look at the cover of the book and see the title and the subtitle. You can open up the table of contents to look at all the different chapter titles. And for me personally, when I go into the library just starting out my research, I get my phone out. And I'd be taking a lot of pictures. I might take a picture of the shelf. I might grab a few books that really stand out to me. So I get a kind of group of books. I'll open them up and take a picture of the table of contents, because later when I'm trying to wrap my head around the topic, it helps to have these keywords and these key ideas available. Looking at the shelves helps give you a sense of the most notable voices from the discourse. So these are the most famous, the most published, the most revered sources. And we're looking for variety. So we do want common everyday opinions, but we also do want to hear what the official experts have to say. It can also help us get a scope for how the topic has developed over time, because when we look at the publication dates, we can kind of see how the discussion and how the vocabulary has shifted across the decades. So if you're available to go into the library in person and take a look at the print media, the librarians can help point you in the right direction. My advice too, when you're going in, I already mentioned to use your phone camera. Getting an overview of certain books. So you can stack up a pile of books that call out to you, and then you can go online too and look up those authors, look up those keywords to find some research online. And then another thing I recommend for anybody who wants to use a book as one of their sources is just use one chapter out of the book, just to save yourself time and to really stay focused. So a good place to start sometimes is the introduction or the conclusion chapter, or if you look at the table of contents, you might find one interesting chapter in there. And then I just use a scan to PDF app like TinyScanner or CamScan, and I just make a PDF with my phone. I don't really go to the copy machine and copy it out, though you can do that too. If you are making copies, make sure to include all the publication information and the page numbers for the book. Just my little hot tip. And it can be daunting to do library research, which is why the DVC librarians are so helpful. You can get help from the DVC librarians by, like we said before, going to the support hub, getting to the library tab, and then once you're in the library tab, you can ask a question. There's a chat that gets responses. It can vary. But you'll get a response back. You can text, you can schedule an appointment to meet with the librarian, and you can get extra credit for this too. So just like we got extra credit for tutoring support, we can get extra credit for librarian support. And they can help you generating ideas, locating sources, evaluating your sources, making those works cited. If you just want to speak to them about the general ins and outs of an annotated bibliography, if you just want to have a conversation about your research, because I know especially for if we're asynchronous or for hybrid, we often are kind of on our own doing this work privately, and it can become isolating. So just having a conversation about your research topic can really give you inspiration, direction, and things like that. So you can access the librarians. And if you can't make it onto campus, the DVC library database has so many options for sources that you can look at. We have some really nice encyclopedias, some really, really good academic databases. We have a video archive. We have news organizations. Like we have access to the New York Times. So there's a lot that we can get support from the DVC library, not just by going there in person, but by using the databases as well. We'll take a look at how to do that later in the module, as long as my fever doesn't come back. So yeah, good resources for the library. Before we move on, I should remind us to take a moment, look back at your notes, pause the video if you want to brainstorm and think about how you want to conduct your research using the library, and then we will look at documenting our research. When you're ready to move on, we will take a look at documenting the research. So the importance of taking accurate, detailed notes is essential to manage the workload. I recommend that when you find a source, you download it, print it as a PDF, take a screenshot, create a screen recording, save it for later, whatever the case may be. You need to get yourself like a Google folder, or if you're on OneDrive, use OneDrive. Get yourself a folder that you can save sources into so that they are all in one place, that you can access them when you need to review them, because academic research is not a one and done activity. You will need to review those sources later on. Also, another great reason to save hard copies or stable virtual copies is so that you can annotate those sources, mark them up, make notes on them, take notes on a separate page, really dive deep and slow into understanding the depth of each source. In this class, we are all about slowing things down, quality over quantity. So having a stable copy is required for that so that you can annotate, mark, and take notes. Evaluate the sources right away. So if you see that something is not relevant to your topic, if this is redundant, so if you already have a source that shares the same perspective, just put it on the back burner. There's no sense diving deep into material that's eventually going to be useless. A lot of what happens in research is we look at a source, we skim through it, and we discard it. We look at a source, we skim through it, and we discard it. Sometimes though, we look through a source and we have this big long source and there's just one key paragraph or like a couple of key concepts that we want to really connect with. And then we have this big source, but our purposes are really just micro focused on this one part of the discussion. So as long as you have one part of the discussion that is relevant to your discourse, then go ahead and keep the source. But if it's kind of irrelevant, just toss it out. Accurately track the citation information. This includes the author, the title, the database, the date that you accessed it. So this is why it's really important to keep good research journals, because the date that you access the source matters when it comes to works cited. Early in the process, begin that deeper interpretation and analysis. So begin really understanding the argument, the rhetorical strategies, looking for fallacies, etc. And also, as soon as you can, start synthesizing connections between sources and start responding from your own point of view. It's going to be really easy to get confused, lost, or fall behind during the next 5 weeks of research and writing, especially if you happen to get sick or have an unexpected appointment or travel occasion, whatever the case may be. So if you get disrupted from your normal flow, it's kind of easy to fall behind. So set yourself up for success by staying organized, keeping clear notes, and that way when you do need a little bit of extra guidance, a little bit of extra support, you can say, okay, this is what I have. This is where I am. This is where I need to be. So how do I get from point A to point B? That way, librarians, tutors, or your professor, me, we can help you get what you need to get out of your research. So taking accurate, detailed notes is essential for managing the workload. I think we're just about done. Yeah, that was it for this presentation. For follow-up, we have a discussion post and a reply. We're doing it all just in one session instead of breaking it up into a post on Tuesday and a reply on Saturday. So the Project 2 planning discussion is just taking a look back at the notes from this lesson, taking a look back at your notes from the essay or the project prompt, and sort of sharing out your plan for how you plan to engage with the discourse community, and documenting your research. We also have our research journal, which is for the AI overview. So look at the instructions for that. And I recommend that as you read the instructions, take notes in your own words. And then later in this module, we will have a workshop which will show us how to use the DVC library resources. All right, that's it from me, you guys. I will see you in the next one. Thank you again so much for your patience and understanding. I tried to keep all of my coughing and sniffling in the editing room floor, so I do apologize if I missed any grotesque moments, but I hope that I will be well for my next recording. I'll see you guys. Bye.